What's going on, everyone? My name is Tom from Dreadlabs, and today we're going to make intense drops in After Effects.
Dreadlabs.
Alright, so as a freelance animator and graphic designer, when I do album covers, most of my clients also request that I do some social media assets with them in an animated format to promote the song on their social platforms. So the people that I usually work for are people in the dance industry, so they are producers and they make from all kinds of dance genres. One of the most important aspects of dance music is the drop, or the build up to the drop. And usually with projects like these, what I do is I make sure that once the drop starts in the visualizer, that the drop gets a little bit more intense. So for this video I bought a track by DICA. He's a techno producer. It's mainly a little bit underground. I hope I pronounced his name correctly as well. I'll put a link down to the song in the description because it's really sick. It's fairly intense, so if you're not used to really distorted kicks and stuff, you might not like this, but it's just one of my favorite tracks at the moment, so I wanted to use this for the tutorial. Anyways, let's take a look at what we have here. So we have two visualizers, one without any effects added and one with the effects added. So let's just listen to the track first and I'll show you what I mean. So yeah, super sick drop, but there's not a lot happening with my visualizer here. So let me just show you what I did with this track to make the drop look more intense and match it a little bit to the feeling of the track itself. So yeah, as you saw, the visualizer here does a little bit of extra stuff based on the intensity of the track once the drop starts. So that's what I want to talk to you about today and give you a couple of tips and tricks on how to make this and use this to your own advantage. So in preparation for this, there's one thing that I did in FL Studio. You don't necessarily need to do this, but this is just an extra step for me that makes my animations look a little bit more crisp. So what I did is I grabbed the track and put it in FL Studio, and I basically went to the part where my drop starts, which is here. And because, as you can see, if you look at the waveform here, it's very distorted and the tail is very long. So what I did is I just grabbed a short kick and I put it over where the kicks of the track are. So what this sounds like is, well, not that good, but I'll explain why I did this in a minute. So as you can see, I just made a kick track that basically follows along with the kick of the track. And I'm just going to explain to you why I did this immediately. So let's just go to our intense drops in After Effects beforehand, and I'll just duplicate this composition so I can demonstrate what I'm going to do today. So we have our track here. I'm actually going to delete this. So what I did is I just rendered this kick track out without the song, so just like this. And basically that's the file that I have here. So it's basically just an empty song with a couple of kicks, and then I also have the track here. So let me just drag in both of those audio files and I'll just open them up until I can see both of the waveforms. And because I only put the kick around a little bit later in the track, I don't see it right now. So let me just make the composition a little bit longer. And as you can see, this is around the point where in the track where I just made the kick, where I added it. So I'm just gonna trim it off and bring it to the beginning of our composition here. So now basically I have two separate audio tracks, one with the original song and one with the kick track. And So there's this thing that you can do in After Effects. You can make keyframes out of the values of the volume that you can see here. can do that by going to right click on the audio, keyframe assistant, and convert audio to keyframes. So if we open it up, go to effects, you can just delete the left and the right channel and click on both channels. And there you have a slider containing a ton of keyframes. So if we open the graph editor, you can kind of see what's going on here. Basically, this is all that responds to the audio of our song. In our case, let me just demonstrate what this can do for you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the scale of our yellow part of our composition here, click on the pick whip and drag that onto the slider here. And you'll immediately see what this does. So as you can see, our yellow part here is basically responding to the slider here. So every value on this slider will basically be added to the scale. As you can see, the slider is 5.08 and the scale is 5.1, which is basically 5.08 rounded upwards. So the reason why I just made a simple kick track instead of using the original track, let me just delete this for a second and let me explain to you why I made this kick track. What I usually do is a lot of the tracks that I work for are mastered or have a really heavy kick or a very long kick. And basically what After Effects does is it just focuses on the volume. If we take a closer look at the audio waveform here, as you can see, there's, well, it's a little bit more compressed than this one. And I want to focus more on the punches of the kicks, if that makes sense. That's why I just use a separate kick for that. So what I'm going to do is mute the original track here by clicking on this icon on the left here. Right click on the kick track, keyframe assistant, convert audio to keyframes. And now we have an audio amplitude layer containing only kicks, as you can see. So I'm just going to call this kick track and I'm going to color it blue so that we all have our kick tracks in blue color. Now I can just mute the kick track. I actually can even delete it if I want to. And I'm just going to grab the original track and unmute that. So what I'm going to do now is do the same thing that I did before. So I'm going to drag our scale with the pick whip to the slider here. And as you can see, this is now 0, and that's just because, well, if we take a look at our graph here, there is nothing in here because, if you remember, there was no audio here. Okay. So, but let's just take a look at what happens when the drop starts. Pretty cool. So the first thing we're going to do is make sure that this thing is visible all the time. So let's just click down on this drop down thing. And basically this type of code is saying what I just explained. So this is basically following along with kick track. What I'm going to do though is type in plus, open brackets, 100, 100. Basically what this means is this will now add 100 in the scale value together with the value here. So as you can see, it's now 135.3. And that's basically the 100 that I typed in here, and the 35.3 that's over here. So it's now completely still. So now it will correctly respond to the kick and keep still if there's not a kick. What I want to do is basically decide which values there should be in here. Basically max these out, because at some point, let's see, well, yeah, as you can see it right now, it basically comes out of the frame and I don't really want that. So what I can do is basically something that we call encoding, we call it mapping. Basically we set a minimum value and a maximum value and we convert that to another value, if that makes sense. If you don't get this, don't worry, you can just type along with what I'm doing here. Just know that these values are different for every different audio file. So if we go to the graph editor here, you can see here that the kicks peak at around 70 units, 70.24 actually. So I think the highest point here is 70.24, and the lowest point is, well, around, let's say 6 or something. And if we take a closer look, you can really see the kicks here happening. So kick happens, then it goes to 70, and then it goes down all the way. And that's pretty cool because that's what makes our stuff bounce around. So what I'm gonna do is I kind of want to have this thing go to 110% maximum. So basically the value was the highest here, like the 70, that should be mapped to 10, because then we have the 100 that I typed in around here, and then a maximum of 10 here, if that makes sense. So what I'm going to do is hold Alt or Option on my keyboard and click on the stopwatch here. And here I'm going to type ease value. And then we're going to type in the maximum value, which is 71. Then the lowest value, let's just keep this at like 10. So that's basically the range between here and here. Everything that's outside of here, so everything that's below 10, so these guys here, are going to get ignored. So I'm going to type out 10, 0. And basically what this does is this maps the 70, the maximum, to a maximum of 10, and this maps the 10 to a maximum of 0. If we take a look at here, and we scroll through, you can see that most of these values don't ever exceed 10 anymore, and that's because of the mapping. So let's take a look and see what happens now to our visual. So to try and explain it one more time, we now have this value, which is now mapped to a value between 10 and 0, added to 100. So the maximum scale that this thing will ever reach is 110%, if that makes sense. I can get that this is kind of complicated because, well, it involves a little bit of coding. But don't let this intimidate you. I heavily encourage you to play around with this. Yeah, let's move on to the next part of this, and that's basically showing you another way to use these to your advantage. So let's just grab the kick track, and we'll duplicate this by pressing Ctrl or Command D on our keyboard. Call this kick track, and we'll rename this kick track inversed. And we'll go back to where we did the mapping coding here. And instead of making this 10 and 0, I'm going to change this to 0 and 10. So for the people that notice, this is basically the inversed version now of this one. So if the kick gets at its highest point, then the value will return to 0. And if the kick gets its lowest point, it goes to 10. So let's grab the texture background. We'll open up the scale and we'll drag the pick whip towards the slider here. And we'll add the 100 as well. And this now should bounce into the opposite direction of our skull. It's a little bit hard to see, so what I'm going to do is stop this thing from animating. Oh, the wrong one. So now you can kind of see what's happening here. Right, we'll just let this thing move again. All right. So now we have some indents moving, and we have 2 of these keyframes. So the next thing I'm going to do is actually make another one, and we'll call this kick track Opacity. And this is one of my favorite ones. Basically, what you can do with this is add flashing, add like color changing. I don't know. So basically, what I'm going to do is pressing Ctrl, Alt, or Y, and we'll rename this to color adjustments. So basically, we now have an adjustment layer, and we can do anything that we want on this. Let's just grab a tint, and we'll map this to inverse colors. Actually, let's see. I want to increase the contrast for a bit. So this, and then we'll, with the levels, something like this is pretty cool, I think. Maybe we'll add a threshold. Alright, so I added a background solid and I did some color adjustments to make this thing, as you can see, the opposite color kinda. So this is the thing without the color adjustment, and this is with the color adjustment, of course. And you might already guessed it. What we're gonna do here is open up the Keyframe opacity, and we're gonna start mapping this thing from 0 to 100, and then we're gonna link the opacity to that. So this is what happens now. So as you can see, you can basically do any color adjustment that you would like and link that so that this will basically match the kick of the track. Pretty cool. So one last thing that I can do with another adjustment layer is have the camera shake. And this is a very easy one, basically probably the easiest thing from this tutorial. So yeah, that's a little bit of a reward for sticking out with me here for so long. Anyways, we'll add another adjustment layer by pressing Ctrl-Alt-Y or Command-Alt-Y or Command-Option-Y if you're on a Mac. And we'll type in wiggle, and we'll drag the wiggle position onto this adjustment layer, and we'll rename this adjustment layer to camera shake. And in the wiggle speed, we'll press 30, and the wiggle amount we'll do 10. And then in the scale, we'll make this 105. And basically, so in the wiggle speed, we'll type in 30, and the amount we'll type in, well, let's say 10 pixels, and then we'll add a transform, and we'll change the scale to 105%. So basically what this thing does is this moves your whole composition 10 pixels every single frame, because the frame rate of our composition is 30, so there's a new second after every 30 frames, and the wiggle changes 30 times per second, so basically every frame. Anyways, what I'm also going to do is make this thing only visible from when the drop starts, which I did by holding Alt or Option and then the bracket keys on my keyboard. So yeah, this is what it looks like when the drop starts now. Alright, so that's pretty much it for this tutorial. So quick little recap, make your own kick tracks, change them into audio keyframe layers, use that to your advantage with the scale and with the opacity of other different adjustment layers, and let your camera shake with the wiggle effector. If you want to get the project file for this tutorial, which basically also includes this pretty cool skull shape, the Illustrator file for that, as well as a nice animated texture background, you can get that by becoming a patron of mine. So if you don't know, all of my patrons make me be able to keep up the weekly videos for you guys, support the channel, and basically keep Dreadlabs up and running. And in return for that, they get access to all of the project files from all of my tutorials, as well as a 15% discount in my asset web store and an exclusive Discord role. If you go 1 tier up, I also have some exclusive tutorials for you and even more project files. So if this is something that you're interested in, check out the link down in the description and become a patron. So yeah, a huge thanks to my patrons, shout out to them, yeah, thank you so much. With all of that being said, don't forget to leave a like and a subscribe and a comment if you haven't already. That also supports me heavily if you don't have the money to support me. And with all of that being said, this was Tom from Dreadlabs tuning out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.